Hello everyone, I'm Daniele. I'm an Android engineer at Deliveroo, and I'm here to talk about how we implemented dark mode in the Rider app, which also is called Batman mode by the PM in my team, and I'm going to show you that later why. How many of you have actually added dark mode to an Android application? Wow, just like 5? Cool, I hope you're going to get something out of this talk. First, a bit of introduction on Deliveroo. I know probably most of you already know what it is, but it's an online food delivery company from UK. We operate in Europe and Asia, Australia, and the Middle East. But I work for the Rider app, which is an application that the Deliveroo provides to riders to work on our platform. So every time you order some food on the app or the website, restaurants have the order, and then there is a rider going to the restaurant and then coming to your door. And they are using an app that we built internally to actually do this process. So the app is not just about this. Of course, they can check the earnings, they can cash out some money, they can also manage their profile, but at its core is actually just for doing this flow. This is actually how it looks like, the Rider app. This is the main screen, so it's a huge map. Where is the rider? If you think about, it's all about where they are, where they need to go, where is the customer, where is the food, and how to get direction to go and move across those areas. The Rider app is not the usual, let's say, consumer app where you have like some lists, some search, some like profiles, some profile like detail screens, or like some transactions, some checkout. There's nothing like that in this app. This app basically riders press that go online button, then they start receiving orders, and then they, which means that we need to know where they are. So the GPS and the location is always on, and it's kind of a real time. So every time you order on the consumer app, you can see the rider where it is, but that means that we need to know from the Rider app where they actually heading to. And the other thing that's quite different from a normal use case is that there are very long sessions. Right? Rider can work even up to 8 hours, 10 hours, so it's like you always have the app on all the time. Which is also why it's called Batman mode, because during the night, for dinner, it's dark outside and they're on the road all the time, so our PM likes thinking that they're actually saving humanity, delivering food. Which is the reason why we actually did it. So, of course, last year Android 10 and iOS 13 came out. They made dark mode like toggle system in the operating system, and then means the user now can opt in. That's a good reason to implement dark mode, but for us it was not the only one. They've been asking for this feature for a long time, just because if you have your app mounted on your bike or motorbike, it's quite annoying to have this huge flashlight always on, because like you have this map and these screens, and it's quite annoying. Also, they always keep complaining about battery, because if you think about having long sessions, everything that helps to put down the battery usage is always nice. And yeah, that's why Batman is there. Cool. So I'm going to show you a bit what was the end result. So we did this over 3 weeks. It was at the end of last year, so we started end of November, end of October, and then mid-November we actually released it. And this is like the result. As you can see, it's much better, much nicer. Once you try that, you never go back to the white version. This is my personal preference. And yeah, so how we actually did the transition is like the main thing about the topic. First, though, I want to mention that in Deliveroo we actually have more than one app, more than one Android app. So we have Rider, but we also have Consumer, which probably is the app that you're familiar with when you order food. And then there is a restaurant app. And we actually have a design system which is shared across the 3 apps. So we actually have a separate repository where all our UI components are defined, colors, buttons, typography, everything like that. And of course, if you want to add night mode to Rider app, you need to add night mode to the design system. But you also need to enter the use case, the consumer restaurant. At the time, we're not ready to do it. And I think they're still not doing that. But maybe in the future. On top of that, another complexity is that, of course, we have 3 different API levels across the 3 apps, which meant that supporting those 3 versions was quite difficult as well. Yeah. The other thing that I want to mention is that actually this started from the designers rather than from us, from my team or from a developer point of view, which means that a designer in the writer team decided it was about time to do this. So luckily he went through all our design system and he actually started defining how the 9 mode of components would look like. So there was quite a good thing for us because we actually got everything already in place. So we had a guideline on how to migrate a surface, like the thing at the top, from white to black, and how to migrate all the text on top of those surfaces. And also we had to do quite big exercise in changing the way we will reference colors, because things like red, green, white, they don't make sense in that night. They would not be the same value. So we actually had to do a huge exercise on going through all the colors and start defining names which were a bit more semantic. So the red becomes arrow, and then if in the future arrow becomes blue or green, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that all the components should respect this type of naming convention. Cool. But how do you actually start? So you have an app with, 20 screens. Like, how do you do that? Like, do you go scan by screen? I think there is no like one solution that fits for all the use cases. The way that we did it was to go through each component. So with the designer, actually, we decided, okay, let's do first all the surfaces, and then let's do all the text, so all the typography across the apps, and then all the buttons, which is kind of the main component, and then go through all the illustrations and icons as well. So we basically did this in phases, and then after each of those, we had a design review all together. So okay, we fixed all the surfaces across the app, let's go on through the app and see if it actually makes sense, if there are use cases that we didn't cover. Of course, those 4 components don't cover the entire application. So if you have dialogues, for example, or if you have tooltips or whatever custom components that you have built, probably will not be covered by those 4. But this was just a way to start and doing the main thing. And then after those 4, we actually iterate to do those more other components that were around the app. Yeah, but from development point of view, the way we actually approached this was, okay, we have the design system in place, we know what to do, we have all the colors, we have all the components defined, but how do we actually do in the app? And the first thing that we decided to do was actually add some Lint checks to the project. So I'm going to cover those in a bit, but basically we wanted to check how bad was the state of the app in terms of like using direct colors, like hard-coded colors, or like things that were not right. The second thing that we decided to do was to adopt the material components library, which is, which I'm going to cover like a bit later, but is a kind of a new library from Google which implements the material design specification. And third, as I mentioned, the Rider app is actually getting all the UI components out of the design system. So we actually had to go to the design, to the shared library across the 3 apps, implement 9 mode there first, and then we actually finally managed to do in the main application. Cool. So about the Lint checks, I'm not going to go into the details of how to add a custom Lint check to a project. I wrote a blog post about that. What I want to focus here is just about how we actually did it. So there are 3 Lint checks that we added. So the first one is like, if there is a color defined in values, you should have a color defined in night. That's quite straightforward. Like if there is a color missing, there is either something that doesn't work, or like you have missed a use case, for example. The second one is like hard-coded color. It's like a no-no, like this, it will not work at night. Or, you can still do exception out of those lints, but most likely there's something that doesn't work there. The third one was a bit more tricky, like this is using a reference color, so it's color white, but white, as I said earlier, like doesn't make sense. So we call this like non-semantic color. Like we were just checking that all those instances needs to be like changed to something that makes more sense. So the way you do this on Lint, so basically Lint gives you an option. Lint will go through all your project and gives you an option to do detection on the file that is visiting. So in this case, we are visiting all the colors defined in your project. So you can override this callback in your detector to say, okay, I'm visiting this element. Think about color white. And then here you can say, okay, can you give me the folder configuration of the color? If it's default, which means it's values/color.xml, I'm just saving here like the name of the color. So let's say white, and then I'm saving the location so you can get where the file is defined, in which file is defined. And then in case like it's a night configuration, I'm just saving like a list of colors that I pass through. This is the way that you can tell Lint, I'm just interested in color, so it will skip all the other elements. And after check each project is another callback is another method that you can override on the Lint detector, which is basically is a chance that Lint gives you to say, okay, I've done all the files in your project. Now you can report something this is wrong. And what I'm doing here is like, okay, let's go through all the colors that I found, the normal one, the one defined in values/color.xml, and I'm gonna check if I have an equivalent in night. If not, then there's something missing. And this is kind of how it look like. Even in Ender Studio, we pick it up your custom Lint, and then you can see even while you're creating a new one, it will tell you, hey, this is like, you're missing the other one in night. Of course, it will also work in normal Lint report as well. So the second one is actually slightly different. So this one is when you use like hard-coded color. So instead of reference a color from your values, you're just putting like a random value. And in this case, you're not interested in the element, but you're actually interested in the attributes of like an XML, of a layout XML. So in this case, we are actually caring only about the attributes. So these are like the attributes that we define. So that's background, foreground, text color, or like all the attributes where you usually put like a color value. And then instead of doing visit element, in this case, you are visiting the attributes because you are interested in the value inside, not actually the name. And here, simply say, oh, if this starts with dash, then yeah, probably you are coding a color. And here you don't need to wait until the end of the project because you know already there's been a violation, so you can report straight away. Similarly, this is the third one, which was like if you use a name color which is not semantic, is going through the attributes like the other one, and then here we just added more color, like more attributes, but the main difference is that instead of checking the value is against an hash character, here just checking that the value is one of those. I just like remove some of the colors, but basically here you can see that it's checking against orange, red, black, so all the colors that you know they don't make sense in night, but also like some our say custom color like aubergine, burger, teal, which is kind of defined by our design system. So also those should not be allowed because probably they will not have a night version defined. And then again, if you find, you just report the issue. The good thing about the Lint checks is that we actually added them to the design system rather than
dark mode.
It's very dark. It's right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So we actually added to the design system instead of the app, which meant that restaurant consumer got that for free, which is good, even though they're not already using it. But the other thing that did this was that every time you add something new in the design system, like you add a new components, the designer asks you to do something, like those Lint checks will prevent you to add a component which doesn't support dark mode, which then means that if rider will get this new component, it will work for night. The second thing that we did, as I mentioned, was the material component integration. So this is like a drop-in replacement for the Ender Design Support Library. And basically implements better the material design specification than the other one. And the reason that we use it, or we decided to use it, was that already defines day-night themes, which means like most of the components, like the basic components, will already be working because it's already done by them. Also, they have quite a good documentation. So as you can see at the link at the bottom, you can go to GitHub. They have a lot of like markdown pages where you can go and see actually how to even do the theming for dark. So it's quite easy to adopt and see how it actually works. Also, I want to just mention that when we actually started using this was in beta. Of course, it's Google, but actually now it's stable since like a week. which is good. The other good thing about this library is that you can just go to GitHub and search how it works. So if like you run the app and you see, hey, this dialog looks weird, like why this button is so big, why is not the color that I wanted, you can actually go into the definition of the button, see which attribute is using to theme, and then you can go to the theme and see, oh, it's this one, so I need to override that one. So it's much easier to understand what's going on compared to like the support design library. So this is kind of what the material components attributes are. So the one at the top are like the normal one. So there's like the old one, color primary, color secondary, so the one that we are familiar with in a way. But they also went at the new material components. So I got this slide from the documentation. And as you can see, there are way more color definitions. So there are the surfaces, which were not there before, and there is color on primary, color on secondary. So there is color on surface as well. So basically, this is more aligned with the material design specification. So if you go to the material design.io, whatever it's called, the website, and you get a component, it will actually reference those names. So you will know that it will actually work in the way. But of course, this is like it's a generic library, so, and we add our own colors. As I showed a bit earlier, like we defined all those error colors, success color, brand color. So we couldn't use the one from the library. So we went out adding those attributes to our own theme. So here we define a UI kit theme, which is UI kit is the name of our design library, and this is the attributes of our theme, and they actually match for background, text, and icons, the color that we define with the designers. So when the designer gives us like an icon and it says this icon should be colored like with attention color, we know this is icon color attention. So there's no ambiguity about which color you should use to tint this icon. Cool. So as I mentioned earlier, like we had this interesting use case where you want to add the dark mode to the design library, but you want two apps to opt out and one app to opt in, which makes things a bit difficult, because if you define a theme which is day and night, then the apps that don't want it on Android 10, it will actually pick it up things from the night folder straight away, so it's quite dangerous. So the way that we did this was tricking a bit with the themes. So here we define two different themes. One is the UI kit theme, and the other one is .day night. But if you see, we actually override in the parent to be for day night, the material components day night, and the normal one, it would just be a light theme. So in this way, we are basically opting out from day night mode for the normal theme. But we already like defined all these attributes. So both our teams needs to like have a specification for those attributes. So the way that we did it was like, okay, these attributes needs to be non-dark mode enabled for the normal theme. So we actually cheated, and then we say, okay, let's say text color primary is black 100. So here we actually doing the thing that I said earlier that you shouldn't be doing, which is like you should put black as a color for the attributes. And then for our day-night theme, we actually reference a color, which is text color primary, which then it will have a normal version and a night version. So just zooming in those two attributes, the text color primary will reference two different colors. The normal one is black 100, like the other theme, but then the night version of it will actually use white alpha 87. But so this is just a way to like recap how it works, but you can see from the normal theme, you will always get black 100, no matter if it's day or night. And then if you have a day-night theme, it will actually pick it up the white alpha 87 for night. The important thing here is that as from the usage point of view, every time you define a text appearance or you use that text color, you should never use the color directly, but you should use the attribute of your theme, because the attribute of your theme will then at runtime get the right color based on which theme you're using. The other thing that the material components library gives you is that elevations in night is quite hard because there are no shadows. Like the way the material design specification says, like you should actually bright up the component above the surface. So if you have like card views or floating action buttons, if you use the material components library, it will do that for you. So you don't need to do this, which is like it's doable, but you don't want to go through all your components and do it yourself. Then we move to typography. So this is like just our browser library of our UI kit theme, and here you can see how they look like. And the way we did this was still kind of the same way as we did the theme. So we have these text appearances. Those are defined in our shared library. You have like text appearance, body, medium, teal, and of course teal, like green, like orange, all of them don't make sense anymore. Like you should not use them because how does green looks like in night. So the way that we did was, as I said earlier, with the design team, we defined all our new semantic color. We just went and find the replace all those green with success. And then, as you can see, the value of text color is not a color reference anymore, but is actually an attribute of your team. And which means that from a user's point of view, you need to go through all your projects, swap up all those gray, green, red, and put secondary, success, brand, which also means that you ended up doing a PR about 1,005. Your colleague will love you. But this is kind of a huge find and replace, so it's fine in a way. The other component that we looked at were the buttons. So that's how the button looks like. If you see, some of the buttons actually look quite different between the two teams. Buttons, for buttons we actually use a compound view, so they're not really buttons. They're frame layout with a text view and then an icon inside, like a loader inside. So, which means that we create those buttons programmatically. So we couldn't use the same technique for the text appearances. So this is just the enumeration of some of the buttons that we have. And then what happens in code is that based on the type that you define, we then load a different drawable. And that's same for like the text color of the button. I want to mention here that like there's no reference here about night mode. So you could do like if night mode is on, load this color or load this drawable, but we started doing that, but then we realized it was a bad idea because you don't want to pollute your code with if, and also you need to put a flag in your theme through code, so it means that the application when it starts, like I don't think like it's maintainable in a way. Even if you add new components, you need to remember to do an if. Like I don't think that works. So we basically move that away, and then we just reference colors and drawables, and then they will do the same trick of using the attribute reference from the theme. So for example, we add all those attributes to our theme, where it's like all the background of the buttons, all the like borders of the buttons, and all the text of the buttons. And those will then need to be defined in the actual theme's definition. So for example, for the Nomad theme, the one that doesn't support day-night, for consumer restaurant, those backgrounds are actually reference color directly. And then for the day-night, they will reference a color reference, which then based on day and night will pick up a different value. So this is how, for example, the button background primary will look like. You see here now is actually a selector because it's a button, right? And then you have two shapes, but then the color of those shapes will actually reference an attribute from the theme. So you don't need to think about this. So you just say, yeah, this is my button background primary, so I just use this attribute, which is called background button primary, and then whatever that means at runtime is delegated to the theme. Unfortunately, this doesn't work on API 11.19, which is like, this was the point where we're like, oh, well, do we want to support this before 23? Because there are other things that don't work on 23, and like, well, we have very few riders and users on this platform, maybe it's not worth it. So we just ignore the problem, and basically we support night mode only above 23. So the way you do this, as usual, you just duplicate the file. So this now becomes the normal definition of the file, where you have anchovy until 100, which means it's not using the reference of the attribute of the theme. And then this now works on API 11.19. just there's a quick thing about these two to ignore, like because we added a rule earlier, like you should not use semantic color, and this is like non-semantic color. This is like anchovy and teal. You should not use them, but because this is like just for API 11.19, you can just say, yeah, I know what I'm doing, so don't notify me about this. And then, and then you can just have the other one in the values.v23, which will use the attribute reference. Cool. Yeah, so the last thing that we did with the designers went through all the illustrations and icons. Illustrations is quite easy. Actually, we managed to have the same illustration across themes. Both like those two illustrations actually works fine across the two. If you can do that, it's perfect. You don't need to do anything. If you need to have a different one, although you just put in the night qualifier version, it will just pick it up. So illustration is not kind of a big deal. Icons were a bit more difficult, at least for us. This is because all our icons don't come with the app itself, but we actually have a shared repository where we get all the icons from designers, which means that they're all black. And they are basically in another repository, so you cannot say, hey, give me the red icon of this specific type. You need to tint them manually. And this is kind of how we used to do this. So we have an extension function on context, and then we use setTint on the drawable and getting the color with the extension function. As you can see here, we are using l.color.white, and again, this is not allowed. You should not do that. So we had to do a new extension function, which we call it theme color. There was to be explicit about the fact it is using the value from the theme rather than using the value from the colors. And here you're just resolving the attribute at runtime. So based on the theme of the app, you will get the right color. And then, of course, we went to deprecate the old one because you should never use the new one now. Sorry, the old one. And that thing was the map. Also, the maps is quite easy to do. Like you just have a different skin, and then you just load the raw resource, and you put the other skin in the raw -night, and then the Google Maps will pick it up the right one. So everything is fine for that. Cool. One thing that I want to mention now is like on Android 10, if you put something in night, it will work. So if you define a color in night, you run the app, you toggle the system settings, you will actually get that color. So it's kind of as difficult to opt out. You can opt out, you can say, kind of hard code everything to be off in the app component delegate, but I mean, I would not recommend that because then you still need to do transition at some point. So the way they actually released this was to just do it for Android 10. So we just did it and then we launched it without adding any settings screen in your application to turn it on, because then you have kind of a subset of people on Android 10 that can do your kind of beta testing of how things will work. So it's much easier to release it without like impacting too many users. And then after the first iteration was fine, we then enabled this dark theme option from the settings. Also bear in mind that the option needs to be different across Android 10 and non-Android 10, because in Android 10 you have use system settings, because there is a system settings, but before Android 10 you actually need to use battery save mode, because Google decided that if the battery save mode is on, then everything becomes dark. And it will actually work. I don't think it works across all manufacturers. It definitely works on Pixel's phone. So if you are before Android 10, you put your battery save mode on, it will actually work. Cool, and this is kind of how you can tell the system, hey, I want to set night mode on, off, or following the system, or it's called auto battery option. Cool, I want to now conclude just talking about the challenges and tips that we encounter through all this process. First is that something unavoidable, at least for us, like you will have huge PRs. The one that I showed earlier, like just find the replace or your green with success, and like it will be a lot of fights, and it's quite hard to avoid this. And also, which is the other thing, is that it's very hard to do code review when you have 1,000 files changed. How you really gonna go through each of them, making sure that the right color is being used from one to the other. So we actually decided it was a bit better to do just QA, just run the PR on a phone, even like from development point of view, not just with the QA phases, and then you can see if the color is off. Like you cannot see the text, or you don't see the icon, or that's like looks bad. And then it's much easier and quicker to actually spot problems. You still did the code review, but like QA I think is a bit more important and faster. The other thing is that I would suggest to do a lot of design review with your designer. Like it's very hard to get it right the first time. Like there's so many screens, so many components, so many buttons, text. Like as soon as you have like a custom view, like yeah, you need to go and check that this thing is gonna work. Or if you have feature flags, turn it off, on. Like you can have like a lot of use cases that you're gonna miss. So do a lot of design review. Like I was giving basically a build every time I was finishing one of those components to designer, and designer was going through the app for a day, give me a list. Hey, this is like 10 things that you should be fixing. It was quite easy to fix. Like it just you forgot to change the value, but if you do quite iteratively, I think it will give you much speed, because otherwise if you do one big bang at the end, it will take ages to even review the app. Other thing that we did and that we suggest to do is like you can even track how many users you have on night mode. So through this flag you can check how many times this is on. And like this is actually the result for us. Like we have at least like 32% on Android 10 on, and then 30% before Android 10. Of course, before Android 10 is not on the system settings, so you actually need to go to settings of the application. And this is completely organic. We never told them that it was on, and we never like surfaced like a dialog we say, hey, you can turn this on. Like it's just Rider that just did it, and which we know that riders are working on the road, and then probably they will want this option on. And I want just to conclude saying, like, I think the best part of all of this is that after 3 years, 4 years, people asking this feature, we finally gave it to them, and I think they were quite responsive. Like this is just a couple of reviews from the Play Store, but we also like got direct feedback from riders that were very, very happy with the feature. Yeah, thank you.